Welcome to the Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. I'm Debbie Iannaci, Head of Global Communications, PR, and Research for GBTA, and I'll be your host for today's episode. Today we have with us Peter Psaltakis, Director, Solutions Engineering, and Stephen Pitcher, Chief Data Science Officer, both from FCM. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Debbie.
Great. So the industry loves to talk about trends, and that's what we're doing here a lot at the GBTA Convention 2022. So the recent Travel Technology Trends report that ran in conjunction with FCM and GBTA, there was an interesting data point. 35% of the respondents identified data analysis and reporting as a pain point. So why do you think it is that travel managers are so challenged with converting those numbers and data in general into insights?
It's a really good question. And it's easy for the average person to go in and look at a chart and say, this is my average ticket price by month. This is my average hotel night by month. There's analytics that are really easy to consume. But now with data science, data analytics and data is becoming a lot more difficult to consume. And you've got to be able to mine that data as well. So as an example, when people talk about traveler friction or traveler stress, it's not cut and dry sometimes, the answers. You've got to have somebody who can go in and get to the bottom of an answer or get the answer. And so as an example, we find like with travel friction, you might have a traveler who, if they travel too much, you might lose that employee because they're traveling too much and there's too much stress on that traveler. But we also see on the other end of the spectrum that you've got a road warrior who loves to travel. And if they're not traveling, they may leave that company. And so you've got to be able to go in and research that data. You got to know who your travelers are. Sometimes it's people who are salespeople who might be traveling a lot. And so you have to be able to dig down into the data and look at really the trends of the data and how that data is being driven. And so typically, like when we look at even things like traveler stress, the frequency of when traveler stress could happen, you could have 2 straight months where you're traveling every single week, and then you might go 6 months without traveling at all, and then you've got another 4 months where you might be traveling a lot. And the idea is to uncover the trends and be able to data mine. And I don't think the average travel manager, they want to manage the travel program. They don't necessarily want to be an analyst and go in and analyze the data and really dig into the trends. And that's what you have to do these days. It's like, well, even things like with advanced purchase, is it your sales department who's departing at the last minute? You can't tell somebody in sales, put that travel off another 2 weeks so we can optimize our ticket price. They have to travel. Same thing when you're meeting a client. You've got to be able to travel on a moment's notice. Whereas if you're having a team meeting, or it's like, finance, operations, or if it's just a general team meeting, that's when advanced purchase really, you dig into the data and you can say, well, people can purchase their tickets 14 to 21 days out. And I think the bottom line comes down to is the travel manager doesn't want to do the additional data mining. They want to just be able to almost ask somebody to do that for them.
I'd say another challenge behind converting the numbers and data into insights is there's data coming at you from multiple channels. It's your TMC, it's your expense provider, it's your payment provider or your bank. It's looking at HR data, it's looking at surveys, it's understanding sentiment, it's looking at unstructured data as well that doesn't come in from a conventional model, and then being able to attribute a quantitative numeric figure to, in many cases, what is a qualitative measure. So it's quantifying the qualitative in many cases. And then there's also the challenge with either incompleteness, the data being invalid or inconsistent as well. So if you're lacking standardization of those different elements, it's near impossible to also just make a basic decision through interpretation of this, because maybe the data isn't even good enough to produce an outcome.
Right, and in another interesting area that industries are really looking at, and as you're talking about data and analytics, is kind of the role of artificial intelligence or AI coming in. So that's not a topic we talk about as pervasively, I think, in business travel. Where do you see that playing a role now and maybe down the road?
So when I look at artificial intelligence and using artificial intelligence, I look at it when you can do things at scale you use artificial intelligence to do things at scale. And that's how in our company we're looking at doing things at scale with artificial intelligence. So as an example, when you look at it, if we didn't use artificial intelligence to predict when would a flight potentially be delayed or canceled, you would have to, if you had a human being doing it and there was, say, 2,000 flights you were monitoring in a day and somebody had to go through 2,000 different flights and be able to determine, well, which ones might be delayed or which ones might be canceled, a human couldn't even go through 2,000 flights in a day and do that. But if you're using data like connection information and you're using weather patterns, you can do that at scale in seconds. You can determine who's at risk of a flight being delayed, who's at risk of a flight being canceled. Some of the other stuff that we do when we're using artificial intelligence and how we do it at scale, we can take things like unstructured data. And so when we look at like travelers, and when I say unstructured data, you could take chat data, you could take emails, anything. And what you can do at scale, and as an example, is use cognitive analytics, which is AI. And you can go through tens of thousands of lines of data really, really quickly. And it can give a sentiment score on a line, just in an individual line of data or a lot of text. And you could see, is somebody happy or are they not happy? Is it positive or is it not positive? And then you can pick those items out and say, well, we've got to go reach out to that person because the sentiment is bad on that particular piece of data. So where we use AI is really to allow us to scale and do things at scale very, very easily. Again, if I was to ask somebody, read through 15,000 lines of data and tell me where somebody's not happy and where somebody's happy, somebody couldn't even do that in an 8-hour day. With systems these days, you could run a cognitive service against that data and do that in minutes and have that information come up in minutes. So,
and the same thing for when you're trying to do a query. You can use natural language generation rather than clicking and picking and doing drop downs and filters or modeling that data hands-on. You can almost Google it, type in what you want to see, and then it'll produce the outcome. So there's AI, there's core AI to many leading BI stacks today that are used in conventional managed travel programs. But it's also not just looking at it from what's on the screen, but how is AI and machine learning being used in the entire overarching travel ecosystem, such as look at what's happening with autonomous vehicles. Those are capturing more data than they had in the past, and it's the data that allows them to make decisions on whether or not to pass a yellow light, whether or not to hit the brakes or speed up. These are very critical to mobilizing people, goods, and services. Thinking about that, ground transportation example, just look at the AI and basic common consumer apps like Waze or Google Maps that optimize routes, road barriers, help ride-sharing services get around. That mobilizes millions of people per day. At the airport, there's facial recognition technology that's going to be your boarding pass as a standard in the future. Some airlines and airports are already doing that today. Government agencies are going to be using AI to use that as maybe your driver's license or passport in the future because it's potentially more secure and safe to do that, and it also removes a level of friction with the travel experience. So there's AI in a lot of things that we just use in our common day-to-day experience that all play in with travel to some degree, inclusive also of e-payments, social media, digital assistants, you name it. It's everywhere, and it's only going to increase because we're capturing more data as we move forward into the future.
Right. Absolutely. And a lot of what we're talking about here today is what a lot of companies and organizations are considering. And another term, and you've mentioned a fair amount of, few in terms of data, but the term predictive analytics is coming up a lot. So where does that kind of fit, and how does that help in understanding and making either better decisions quicker, faster?
Yeah. These are all great questions, and I hate to say that, but they're all great questions. So first, defining predictive analytics, and most people, when they hear predictive analytics, you're using past data and current data to determine future results. But there's other types of predictive. So when you might say, well, what's my ticket price going to be in the future? What's going to be, 2, 3, 4 months from now? But other things that are predictive in nature that people don't realize are doing things like classification and clustering. So you can do classification using like a random forest algorithm, and that's an algorithm that's out there. You can use k-means clustering to cluster data together. It's almost, and I try to bring things into simple terms when I discuss some of these things. Like you could cluster, again, when we cluster data, we look at the type of traveler. So we look at 3 types of travelers. There's the road warrior. Then we talk about the business traveler, which is your middle, and then your occasional traveler. So you can take all the data elements, bring it in, and then say, well, we're going to cluster that information. We use a k-means algorithm to cluster that data together. So then we can determine by bringing in, not just saying, does somebody travel, the typical person's going to say a road warrior might travel 12 times a year, or a person has, more than 20 nights hotel. We look at it bringing in multiple data points and then to cluster that data to determine who are the road warriors. So again, the great thing with using predictive analytics is a lot of it now is low code, no code. You can literally in some BI stacks just right click and say, I'm taking an entire data set and then just cluster this data together and see where it falls into the clusters. And then you can add and subtract data to potentially get better clusters of that data. And then, so now you as a travel manager can determine, well, these are my road warriors, because it's not just, somebody could say, I've flown 12 times a year. Well, is it 12 one-day trips, or is it 12, 7-day trips a year?
Like 10 segments a trip. Or
Exactly,
where you're going
exactly.
places and not just back and forth to the same city for work.
Yeah. And again, the great stuff is, what's out there these days is very low code, no code to get results like this and do predictive analytics. So again, you can predict who are my road warriors very easily. You don't have to go through and create your own algorithms. There's algorithms out there that do that.
Great. Well, you mentioned also, I want to go back to something you just mentioned a minute ago about BI. So FCM recently announced an integration with Power BI. So why did you choose Power BI, and how has that really changed the experience for customers?
Yeah. So we just, let me first talk about Power BI. It's Microsoft's business intelligence stack, and there's over 300,000 companies worldwide that use Power BI. And when we went through the selection process, we use Gartner's Magic Quadrant from a standpoint of, evaluating, and for people who don't know what Gartner's Magic Quadrant is, there's tech stacks. There's many different tech stacks and tools out there, and it allows you to, they go out and they evaluate the tech stacks, and they put them in a quadrant where they define who the leaders are in the industry, who the visionaries, and they put them into 4 different categories. And I've been actually interviewed for multiple BI stacks because we've used multiple BI stacks. And so with Gartner's results, Power BI and Microsoft's BI stack is the leader in the industry according to Gartner. And it's the interesting thing is, it's not even close now. Tableau is second, and they're the closest thing to Power BI, but it's, when you look at Gartner's Magic Quadrant, there's a good distance between Tableau and Power BI. And then the funny thing is, there's a good distance between Tableau and every other BI stack that's out there. So what you're looking for in a BI stack, and why we chose Power BI, not only was it, okay, are they the leaders in the industry, is the average analyst today, you want to be able to, and I talked about it before, is low code, no code. The average person should be able to go into a BI stack and not have to say, how do I have to write lines of code to get results? And what Power BI does really, really good is it lets the average user look like an expert when it comes to analytics. So it's a lot of just, again, low code, no code, click, do this. And the average BI stack out there can't do that. And when we've worked with Microsoft, and right now we're a partner with Microsoft, is their product team to build Power BI is over 1,000 people build Power BI. And the interesting thing is, you can go on, they've got a great YouTube channel with what they produce on a monthly basis. In our old BI stack that we used to use, on a yearly basis, what they could do in a year Microsoft does in a month. That's how big their product team is. That's how coordinated they are, and they're just putting distance between themselves and everybody else.
Well, and that's significant. That's something that you want, because again, we're not only planning for today, we're planning for tomorrow and well beyond.
Exactly.
When we're utilizing these. So one of the key things now that we're talking about a lot of the technologies and the analytics and things like that, a lot of discussion in our industry is around sustainability and really thinking about people and planet goals have become really important, and travel performance. How can travel managers, harness the power of data to really improve upon those areas that they're trying to move forward?
Certainly. People and planet, it's not just travel management. I mean, people and planet, it's corporate strategy, and the travel is a critical component to the execution on that corporate strategy. But this needs to be, if you're going to have a strategy, it needs to be set from the organizational level and then acted upon in alignment with corporate travel. So when we look at that, it's also a matter of balancing the profit, because if you're a corporation, there's a give and take that goes with being more people-centric. You're going to have to invest in more wellness. You have to invest in, for the corporate travel, maybe more perks or perhaps more premium travel options in order to achieve some degree of happiness with the users or to increase your retention or satisfaction with travel. There's definitely costs affiliated with being more sustainable. Of course, at the same time, you could just as equally not travel, but we know that if you don't travel, there are some things that you do have to travel to. So it's balancing that. It's figuring out where are you in alignment with net zero or carbon neutral objectives that might be set by your corporation. Are you offsetting your travel? Are you buying sustainable aviation fuel? These all increase really the cost of travel. And as we know, business travel, especially as we emerge from the pandemic, is only going up with things like rising fuel prices, with supply and demand, with inflation. So it's balancing it also against the profit. But with that said, to make better decisions with the data, you have to look at, are we reducing our number or increasing the number of red eyes, because maybe that saves on a hotel night, and that has a human impact. These are exhausting. They take a human toll, which could in turn impact long-term satisfaction. Maybe if you're trying to decrease your carbon footprint, you have to look at the data. First off, you have to have it. You have to figure out if your TMC data is also in alignment with spend that may have come through other channels, so that you can then figure out, where are we in our path towards reducing our Scope 3 emissions as an entity. How can we also do things like shift, like if you're traveling in the Northeast corridor in Europe or in parts of Asia where there's a lot of rail travel, maybe it's more convenient to hop on a plane, but it's more sustainable to hop on a train. How much are you shifting from one behavior to another? Are you also decarbonizing your spend? Scott Gillespie, maybe he'll listen to this. He's a great guy, great advocate and mentor, put out a great piece as well about KPIing your CO2 per dollar of airfare. And for example, if you're putting out 500 kilograms of CO2 and has a price of $500, that has a 1-to-1 ratio. So it's like a new metric as well in terms of how you can also analyze your data using a new metric, which check out the piece that he put out last month. So with that, there's a lot you can do with the data in order to drive your people and planet objectives. And a piece that Stephen and I put together, this will probably be on the GBTA archive from this event. We presented yesterday on a triple bottom line methodology. The idea of the triple bottom line is that in a stakeholder connected capitalist environment, shifting away from shareholder primacy, you have to equally spend as much focus on people and planet as you do on profit. And with this methodology, we took 8 different dimensions across people, planet, and then also used things like public SEC filings, looking at your income statements or balance sheets, and putting together kind of like the United Nations Human Development Index out of a 1.0 scale. Where are you indexing across those three different dimensions, and then where does that then put you in your path towards achieving data success and corporate performance success under this broader topic. So there's a lot you can do with the data to manage these better.
Right. No, those are the ways that if we're not already thinking that way, we should be, and we must be for a variety of reasons. And again, so for my final question, then we were talking about people and customers, right? So what are you hearing out there about what customers are telling you about what is most important when it comes to their data?
There's a couple of things. First is data quality is the big thing. If the data's not right, it's going to give you the indications are going to be bad that come through that. But I think one of the bigger things and the bigger trends that I'm seeing when it comes to data and talking to our clients or talking to people even who aren't our clients is how do you take data, travel data, and how do you bring it into your data ecosystem? And how do you use that across business units to measure results? So as an example, I'll give you sort of an example of what I mean by that. When we look at analytics and I'll use this from a sales perspective. From a sales perspective, we try to look at what are all the characteristics of making a good sale in our company. Or even from an account management perspective, what are all the characteristics of managing an account in our company and doing it really well? I can't look at all the characteristics of how many times should you fly to meet a client, or how many miles away, or even on a trip when you're doing a sales presentation. Does somebody fly in the night before? Do they fly in that day? How many, how far do they have to fly to do that? So what you want to do is you want to bring in your travel data, and you want to be able to query that across your entire organization, even with turnover, attrition in your staff. Did that person travel a lot? Let me look and see, did that traveler have high friction, and did that lead to them leaving the company? You can't do that unless you're bringing that data into your organization. So we're starting to hear more of the trends of how do I bring that in? Again, we look at revenue generation travel. So did that revenue generation travel result in revenue? How much revenue did it generate? So if I took X amount of flights, if I flew X amount of miles, what did that translate into sales or retention? So we're seeing that a lot more through an organization where you can mash that data together or, correlate that data across your organization to see results.
I'll just add and say that it has to be accurate, relevant, and timely. So accuracy, you can't have inaccurate data. It needs to be standardized. It needs to be complete. And then in terms of timely, it needs to be actionable in that it's coming to you in a period of time where you don't have a latency gap or latency period where it will be, in that case, like we said earlier, irrelevant. It must be relevant. So accurate, relevant, and timely is really what customers need with their data. And if it's not, it's very difficult to make decisions.
Well, it sounds like data is at the center of everything, of making better decisions, making travel better, and us as an industry and as companies of achieving goals that are for the betterment of how we travel. So, Stephen and Peter, thank you so much for joining us on today's podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Debbie.
You've been listening to The Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. For more information about GBTA and its work, visit gbta.org and be sure to rate and review us wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.